I can confidently say Evanescia is a tier 0 unit on release, so let's break down why that is and how to build and optimize her properly. Evanescia has 3 different kinds of conversion in the kit. Firstly, 20% of her current crit damage is converted to elation. Secondly, Evanescia can steal her allies' certified bangers. Evanescia gains an equal amount of energy when she gains certified bangers, and vice versa. The thing that they don't tell you about this is that when converting certified bangers to energy, it is actually affected by ERR. So the energy you gain will usually be larger than the certified bangers. This is how Evanescia gains energy so quickly, even when her energy cap is 480, and how she can pretty easily hit over 1000 certified bangers in battle. But Evanescia also has a follow-up attack. Every 240 energy, the Foxmaster will perform a follow-up attack and reset the charge, regenerating 10 extra energy and applying 12% vulnerability. And kind of like Sparksy, Eva has split scaling. Her attacks deal a decent amount of attack, but also scales very well with elation, usually about 240+% per ultimate. Furthermore, her ultimate can increase the number of bounces based on missing enemies, allowing her to comfortably deal with both many enemies or just a single enemy, making her very flexible. Combined with her high frequency and damage, Evanescia on release is already one of the best raw damage dealers in the entire game, at about 81 to 89,000 damage per action value at 3 targets, only slightly behind the full Remembrance team, and this requires about half the investment. So if you do account for the elation stages, this can still increase further. In game, I would even get one whole extra ultimate over the theoretical because enemies can give so many punch kinds throughout the battle. And she still has potential to get even better in the future. But of course, there are some downsides to her kit right now. Gaining so many certified bangers doesn't actually do much more for her damage. Certified bangers increases at a decreasing rate. The more you have of it, the less effective it will be. This means that stages or future teammates that can stack even more bangers for Evanescia will be less effective for her as compared to the other elation units in terms of raw damage. When you go from 0 to 500 bangers, it's a huge 337% increase, but the next 500 to 1000, it's barely 50%. It is so diminishing at the point that a few hundred bangers barely increases her damage, but stacking a ton of bangers is exactly what Evanescia needs, because this charges her ultimate faster. Normally, to get more damage, we look to something else like true damage or rest band from RMC or 3B, but Evanescia pretty much requires an elation team in order to charge her ultimate frequently enough to deal decent damage. So this makes it harder to run units like RMC or 3B that would normally be very good for Evanescia's damage. Right now, it can still kinda work without a full elation team, but that's because, again, enemies are giving a ton of punch lines. Against non-elation stages, it can be very rough without external energy regen, like Ho or Sunday. You would get around 3 to 4 as compared to the normal 8 to 9 ultimates in the same rotation. So even if one ultimate does a ton more damage with RMC, you still deal less damage overall, so Evanescia teams are still quite heavily restricted to elation, just like Silver Wolf 999. To be honest, I'm not really surprised there, so overall I still think Evanescia is a very high value DPS to pick up, but does require a bit more skill from the player. But before we get to that, let's quickly go over how to build her. For light cones just like Silver Wolf and Sparksy, she has very little good options. Abyss by far is a signature light cone. It gives 36% crit damage, which will be converted into more elation, and also 15% vulnerability, but the reason why it's so good is the extra 20% energy regen rate. Once again, the conversion from bangers to energy is affected by ERR, hence in just 2 cycles, this can already give you 1 to 2 more ultimates than other options, so the total damage will just be much higher there. From here, today's Good Luck is a great second option, but is a better pass light cone, followed by Mashi Shroomy and Together Tomorrow, both 4-star free-to-play options. Relics are also pretty straightforward. Everglorious plus Punk Lord again, for main stats usually crit damage body, speed boots, damage orb, and energy regen rope. Speed boots are usually to get more energy. I thought about running 0 speed Eva at first, but in actual gameplay it didn't feel very good because her skill gives 10 punch lines. And since she can steal bangers from her teammates, during an AHA instant, this is actually converted into 20. Obviously, Evanescia is all about getting as much energy as you can, but it also helps that attack percent as an alternative isn't very good since the majority of the damage is still elation. From here, since we are also using Huo and we have no inbuilt damage boost, a physical damage orb will help to optimize the non-elation damage that she has and easily outperforms an attack orb. Finally, we obviously want to run an energy regen rope so that we can get her ultimate more frequently. The other small downside I mentioned is that it can be slightly harder to play Evanescia. So, let's try and get rid of that skill issue. Firstly, speed tuning AHA and Evanescia. I've tested both playstyles, Eva faster than Aha and Eva slower than Aha. There wasn't too big of a difference in game, but the theoretical best and the one I genuinely recommend is actually Evanescia faster than Aha. This lets her keep the bangers from Aha instance for longer and also allows her to convert the 10 punchline from a skill instantly. But because Eva is heavily overperforming right now in game content, sometimes Eva being slower than Aha can do better. Basically what you do is you clear the wave before the second turn, or better yet before the second Aha instant. What happens is that you lose the energy from one skill, but the trade-off is that you keep the buffs for one extra turn. As a result, on the second wave or cycle, you already start out with a lot more bangers than usual, and this makes it much easier to clear the stage quickly. However, for both playstyles, the general idea to piloting the team is the same. Firstly, we want Eva to keep the certified bangers and buffs as long as possible while trying to do the opposite for her teammates. So our usual starting rotation looks like this. I wait for Eva to lock in a turn before using Yao Guang ultimate and Ho Ho's ultimate. But because Eva will overcap on energy here, I insert Eva's ultimate in between the two, and this allows Evanescia to extend the duration of all those buffs without overcapping on energy. If you still don't know the reason why I wait for her to lock in the turn, it's because if you apply a buff during the character's turn, it doesn't tick down even after that. I also covered this in my Sparksy guide, it's the same concept. The other thing to focus on in gameplay is the timing of Evanescia's ultimate. You don't want to rush to use it instantly after you get it, you want to be a bit more patient with it. So for example here, I'm quite patient with her ultimate. I wait for the Aha instant and skill because both actions will give me even more bangers and more energy. Only then do I use her ultimate at 800 plus stacks. If I ulted instantly before, it wouldn't have given me one extra ultimate anyway, and I would deal less damage because I only have 600 plus stacks. I did say certified bangers don't do that much more damage for Evanescia, but this is unfortunately part of her kit, and it is still very important in helping you squeeze out that little bit more damage and getting the most out of her kit. If you need more examples, I will have a showcase video out soon where I explain the thought process of most of my runs. But another very important thing to learn is the team setup. Evanescia should ideally be played with Elation units like Yao Guang or Elation MC. Sparksy can sometimes do better, but only at E0S1. Eva just benefits less from Sparksy as compared to Silver Wolf, but at the same time she also benefits a lot more from Elation MC and Ho Ho. Which is why when comparing Evanescia to Silver Wolf, the difference between E0S1 Sparksy and Elation MC is smaller for Eva than Silver Wolf. Hence I don't recommend getting Sparksy for Evanescia, it would be better to grab E1 instead. Now for your teammates builds, in a team with Evanescia, Lushaka is a lot less useful, which is why I recommend Broken Kill and Warrior Goddess for Ho Ho. If Yao Guang is already at 200 speed, then she can also run Broken Kill because it can stack, otherwise Sprightly to get the 3 turns in the first cycle, and of course Diviner. With Yao Guang on the team, Diviner cannot stack, so Elation MC then runs Sacerdos to give Evanescia even more crit damage. And for Ho Ho's icons, I recommend her S1, Quid Pro Quo, or Post-Op Conversation, basically anything that gives the team more energy. Finally, we have Eidolons. Evanescia's E1 is actually one of the best E1s I've seen in a while, but this only really sees the full value if you also have her S1. Basically, you get a lot more elation skills, and it also gives a lot more energy than before, on top of the very valuable 20% rest spend. Even the difference in game is kinda crazy. You go from having to play quite optimally to 0 cycle, to just bash your head on the keyboard and you probably still win. E2 is another great Eidolon. Basically, the bangers you steal from allies are increased from 75% total to 125%. This doesn't look as big of an upgrade here, but it can be better depending on the scenario that you use. E4 is just 15% defense ignore, it's something at least, and finally E6 is the classic merrymaking Eidolon, up to 35% total depending on the number of certified bangers that you own, and certified bangers also last for one more turn. So it's super easy to hit 1000 plus, and you can sometimes even hit 2000, but it's really overkill at that point. However, Evanescia also regenerates 120 energy once every 4 ultimates. This and the extra duration on the bangers is already a huge upgrade, and when you add the merrymaking, it's something stupid like 260,000 DPV. Like, she might actually have the best overall Eidolons for DPS right now. It's like competitive with Evernight. Very high value other than E4. So if you're looking for extra investment, I do recommend at least E1, but again, it only gets the full value if you also have S1. But E1 S1 is just disgusting levels of damage. So if you can get there, you just clear everything pretty easily. But that is it for my Ever guide and review. Thanks for watching, and see you.